Hi, I have a question for you. What house system do you use? If you are a student or professional modern Western astrologer, this is a question we ask all the time because different astrologers use different house systems. Some use Placidus, some use Koch, some use Campanus, Regiomontanus, whole sign houses. Some use more than one house system. Some just use one house system. You've got to make a decision. Now, if you're a student or a professional Vedic astrologer, the question does not come up as often because most Vedic astrologers use what we call in the West whole sign houses. But from the Western astrologer's viewpoint, it's a big question. What house system do you use? And I'm going to share with you the house system that I use. Actually, it's systems. Well, as I said, some astrologers use more than one house system. I use three. I use three house systems. And the net result of using these three houses has a lot in common with quadrant houses, interestingly. So I'm going to show this to you. But it may be that one reason why quadrant houses have remained popular for so long is, at least my theory, is that there are three house systems at work, and by at least one of those, the placements in the quadrant houses will be accurate. So let me show you how this works. Let's look at a chart. Let's look at the chart of this fellow Donovan from, I guess it was the 60s or 70s, a folk rock singer and songwriter. Now, here's what I want you to look at, especially if you're a student or professional modern Western astrologer. When you see Saturn here, like here's his first house cusp, and here's his fourth house cusp. So his fourth house cusp is a little bit before Mars. And this quadrant, this lower left quadrant, is small. This is what happens with quadrant houses. We call the distance from the ascendant to the fourth house cusp a quadrant. And right now I've got Placidus houses, and Placidus house system has decided where these intermediate cusps are. Now, when we look at Saturn, we instinctively, if you're a modern Western astrologer, think it's in the third house because it's a little bit left. It's a little bit to the left of the fourth cusp. And we see Mars and Pluto just to the right of the fourth house cusp. And we think fourth house. I mean, we do it so instinctively that it becomes natural. Or when you see Venus and Uranus just below the horizon, you instinctively go first house. And if a planet is a little bit above the ascendant, you instinctively say 12th house. Now, in recent years, people have started using whole sign houses, and then that's no longer true, that a planet just above the horizon is in the 12th house. But with the quadrant houses, we tend instinctively to relate a planet to a nearby angular cusp, if there is one. Right? You all following me? So let me say it again. Mars and Pluto, what house are they in? Boom, you say fourth house, because they're just a little bit to the right of that very powerful angular fourth house cusp. These angular cusps are very powerful. We look at them as like anchor points. And Saturn's a little bit left of it, we say third house right away. Let's look at another chart, Steffi graph. Now, using the quadrant house system approach, what house are the Sun, Moon, and Mercury in? We automatically say 12th house because they're right above the horizon. Now, if the planets are far from an angular cusp, we have to look a little more carefully. Like Jupiter and Uranus, we have to go, okay, here's the cusp. It's in the fifth house. And then a lot of Western astrologers say, well, you know, this fifth cusp is kind of fuzzy. So Pluto at the end of the fourth house is already picking up a fifth house. And we don't even agree about where these cusps are, these what we call intermediate cusps. When I say we don't agree, what I mean is if you use Koch or Regiomontanus or Campanus, the house cusp will be different. So, you know, it's vague, or different opinions about not only what house system to use, but how do you think of the cusps? Do you think of them as fuzzy? Do you think of a planet at the end of one house picking up the next house or not? Do you think of a planet on the cusp as being strong in that house? But one thing that's consistent with quadrant houses is if you use quadrant houses and you look at Steffi graphs, Sun, Moon, Mercury, you immediately go 12th house just above the horizon. Now here's my theory. My theory is that these angular cusps, they all trigger house systems. It's not just the ascendant that triggers or starts. The ascendant starts the houses, right? I mean, it's the beginning of the first house according to a quadrant house system. It's the beginning of the first house. If you use whole sign houses, you don't agree with that. But if you use any of the quadrant houses or equal houses, then you look at the ascendant as the starting point. It's like the starting line of a race. It's where everything starts. It starts here, and the seventh cusp is halfway through. It's halfway through. So these are the anchor points. Well, why couldn't the IC and the MC be anchor points for houses? Well, you may say they are anchor points, and they anchor the beginning of the 10th and 4th. But here's my suggestion, that houses are actually equal in size. They're always 30 degrees. And there are equal houses from the ascendant, and there are equal houses from the midheaven. So those are two of the three house systems that I use. Excuse me, I'll tell you about the third one in a minute. But that's where, let's start with that. There are two house systems, equal houses and equal from the midheaven. And what's interesting is that the quadrant houses have something in common with both of these. So, for example, with equal houses, these planets just above the ascendant are still going to be in the 12th house. So any planet near the ascendant or descendant stays in the same house with equal houses, right? I mean, obviously. Let's do it. If I go to settings, house system, equal houses, well, obviously, I've just made the 12th house 30 degrees instead of whatever size it is. So planets in near the 1st or 12th or in the 6th and 7th, near these cusps, remain in the same houses. And planets near the MC and the IC, let's look at Donovan's chart for this. Here's Donovan's chart. What if I do equal houses from the midheaven? So the midheaven is still the beginning of the 10th house, but 30 degrees from the midheaven is going to be the 10th house. That means that Donovan's 10th house is bigger than what it shows for Placidus. Instead of going from 29 Capricorn to 22 Aquarius, it goes from 29 Capricorn to 29 Aquarius, and then 29 Aquarius to 29 Pisces. Every house cusp is at 29 degrees. And what this does is it means that Saturn, Mars, and Pluto will stay in the same houses. Get the point? So what's happening is that if you use equal houses from the ascendant and equal houses from the midheaven, then those planets that are near the ascendant or descendant stay in those houses with equal. And those houses near the MC and the IC stay in the same houses. This is why quadrant houses work. And why there's no agreement about where the intermediate cusps are, because they're actually not there. So it's a way to resolve the confusion of what's going on. Why do quadrant houses seem to work? Because one of the house placements is correct. It'll either be correct by equal from the ascendant, or it will be correct by equal from the midheaven. Let me show you for Donovan, equal from the midheaven. What it's going to do is it's going to put 29 Capricorn 44, his midheaven, at the top. It's still the beginning of the 10th house, and we'll make equal houses from there. I'm in the Sirius 3.0 software. I go to Settings, House System, and Equal from MC. And there it is. MC is 29 Capricorn 44. Every house the same size. Saturn is still in the 3rd house. Mars and Pluto are still in the 4th house. So again, I'm going to go back to house system Placidus, a quadrant house. And let me repeat this point. When you look at Saturn, if you're a modern Western astrologer, you see it a little bit to the left of the 4th house, you say 3rd house. Boom. Mars and Pluto, a little bit to the right of the IC. Boom. 4th house. Venus and Uranus, just a little below the ascendant. Boom. Obviously, it's the 1st house. Or we go to Steffi Graf. Sun, Moon, Mercury, especially Sun and Moon, and part of Fortune, just a little bit above the ascendant, 12th house. So all 4 angular cusps are equally powerful in creating houses. Intuitively, it kind of makes sense because in Western astrology, we put an equal emphasis on these 4 major cusps. They're so powerful. A planet transits over one of those angular cusps, and it rocks your life. I mean, it has a huge impact. And all 4 of them trigger their starting points for a house system. So there are actually 3, but I've only told you about 2 so far. 2 house systems, equal from the ascendant and equal from the midheaven. And that's why on this opening slide here I say, are quadrant houses an illusion? My answer is yes. They're an illusion in that they actually work. But the reason they work is because there are 3 other house systems. I'm only showing you 2, equal from the ascendant and equal from the midheaven. And in one of those house systems, the house placement is correct. In other words, let's go back to Donovan's chart. Saturn is in Donovan's 3rd house. Mars and Pluto are in his 4th house. According to Placidus, according to almost any quadrant house system, because they're near this IC, and according to equal from the midheaven. Actually, what happens is that houses are very similar to a zodiac. The zodiac is 30-degree sections, perfect 30-degree sections. And the tropical zodiac is created by the intersection of what we call a great circle with the ecliptic plane, which is also a great circle. And the houses are created the same exact way. They're created by the intersection of a great circle, the horizon plane, with the ecliptic plane. Same thing that creates the zodiac signs, creates the houses. In fact, any great circle intersecting the ecliptic plane creates a zodiac. So houses are actually a zodiac. They are actually a zodiac. They are like you could call them a horizon zodiac. And they're related to our way of relating to the world. And the equal from the midheaven is a zodiac related to our aspirations, our projection in the world, and our soul, like our home, that duality. And the ascendant is a duality of how I express myself and how people respond to it. So they are actually kinds of zodiacs. And the idea here is that there's a simple basis to astrology. They're 30-degree sections. So that's the idea. It helps explain why astrologers have used quadrant houses for so long, because they work, because one of those house placements will be correct according to either equal or to equal from the midheaven, and also why we could never find the bloody house cusp. Why can't we agree about where the 5th cusp is or the 6th cusp? Why are some people using Placidus and some Regiomontanus, and some are saying the cusp is fuzzy, and when you get to the end of the cusp, you're moving into the next house, and some do not say that? It's because they're not there. And why hasn't anybody made a really strong argument for transits over these cusps, triggering major events related to the house, just like transits over angular cusps do? Because they're not there. The quadrant houses are a kind of simplification, a kind of compression of the effect of these other two houses. And it's more accurate to just use equal from the ascendant and equal from the midheaven. So over here, I have, it's going to be kind of small on your screen, but here are 4 chart wheels for Donovan. In the upper left is the Placidus, the quadrant houses. In the upper right is equal. These are the equal houses. So he has 10 degrees Gemini rising, and here's the placement using equal houses. In the lower left is equal from the midheaven. There's the 29 Capricorn 44, which is his midheaven, and then equal from there. And the other one, the third kind of house system, is equal from the vertex. And I'll explain why we use the vertex in a second, but for a moment, just take my word for it. And the vertex becomes the 7th house. Now, in the case of Donovan, his vertex at 26 Libra is almost square his midheaven at 29 Capricorn. So equal from the vertex, the one in the lower right corner, and equal from the midheaven, the one in the lower left corner, are almost identical. There's only a few degrees difference. So you see the placements are the same. And you see that by equal from the midheaven and equal from the vertex, Mars and Pluto are in the in the 4th house. So you can see that Mars and Pluto are in the 4th house. And Saturn is in the 3rd house by both of these house systems. But they do not put Venus and Uranus in the 1st house. Venus and Uranus are in the 1st house using equal houses. So with one house system, it matches the Placidus. Here it is Placidus, Venus and Uranus in the 1st, equal agrees. So those are the 3 house systems that I'm proposing are the accurate ones. And we all have to decide what we think is right with houses, and that's what I've come up with. Now, the vertex is another point created by the intersection of a great circle with the ecliptic plane. It's what we call the prime meridian that intersects the ecliptic plane. So the prime vertical goes from east-west and then overhead through the zenith. Anyway, I have other videos that go into the astronomy in detail and explain all this. We don't need to be concerned about that here. But what I want you to know is that there's a simple reason why there's a zodiac, why there are houses. And it's created from this process of these great circles intersecting each other. And it resolves a lot of our questions and problems about how to use houses. So let me go over my points on the slide here. And I've covered most of them, but I'll use the slides to review and to fill in a few things I might not have mentioned. Number 1, let's just review. Many modern astrologers use systems like Placidus, Campanus, Regiomontanus. They divide the distance between the angular cusps, between the ascendant and the midheaven. And they all place those intermediate cusps in different places. Astrologers do not agree on where these intermediate cusps are. They don't agree because some use Placidus, some use Koch, some use Regiomontanus, and they will never agree is what I predict because they aren't there. Those are just approximations, and we should use equal from the ascendant, equal from the midheaven, and equal from the vertex. Okay, and as I mentioned, I'm just reviewing. A big problem with quadrant houses is that the ascendant can be conjunct the midheaven, the MC or IC, and life goes on very normally when this happens. It doesn't make sense astrologically. If quadrant houses are accurate, and when the MC is conjunct the ascendant, and it can be exactly conjunct, I'll put a link to that video that shows that at the end of this one, 6 houses completely disappear and life is normal. It's an indication that maybe there's something else going on. And so the theory I'm presenting explains why quadrant houses work, but they're actually an oversimplification of 3 other houses. Okay, and I've talked about this. I'm just reviewing. Astrologers have not been able to determine where the intermediate cusps are based on transits or progressions or solar arcs going over those cusps. as one astrologer said, if intermediate cusps work, we would have figured out which quadrant house system is correct by now, and I agree with that. Number 4, some astrologers will say, well, houses, I use a certain house system and it always works. Well, there's a lot more than just what house system you use. How do you look at the cusps? Do you use sharply divided cusps? Do you consider a planet near the end of one house to be entering the next house? And also, how do you interpret the houses? Some people say the second house is possessions. Some say it's values. Some say it's how you value yourself, your self-worth. There's so many different interpretations. I think we have to admit that there's a broad array of possibilities. And if you are one of those very rare people who's very sure that your house system always works, then please write a book and explain exactly what interpretations you use for the houses, how you look at the intermediate cusps, and give examples of people born at these extreme latitudes, like in Scandinavia, and how it works. These have all been problems I have not been able to resolve, except by using equal from the ascendant, equal from the midheaven, and equal from the vertex. And in my personal work with clients and so on, it works beautifully. We don't have controlled research studies to validate it. And as I've said before, astrologers have been using quadrant houses for a long time. Then people introduced whole sign houses, and some astrologers changed from quadrant to whole sign. Some use both whole sign and a quadrant house system. It shows that astrologers overall are fairly flexible and not convinced of a house system that works. And I think these 3 house systems really work, and I think they will continue to be used for a long time. And I've talked about this. I'm just reviewing how in certain places the 6 houses can disappear. And also, very disturbing is that the ascendant can disappear, and I have a solution to that as well. And the solution to that is that as you head far from the equator, the vertex and anti-vertex, that axis, begins to overtake the power of the ascendant. So what happens is that the ascendant, far from the equator, behaves badly. It gets chaotic. And the vertex, just the opposite problem. The vertex goes crazy near the equator. So some people say, I use the vertex, I use the vertex. Well, if you use the vertex for somebody born on the equator, there's only 2 possible positions for it. It doesn't act in a nice way, and it doesn't explain how people could be so different. It doesn't make any sense. So the ascendant and vertex change power. Now, that's a radical idea. I'm going to put links to 2 videos at the end of this one, and one of them will be to the video that explains how the vertex and ascendant interchange power. So I've come up with a solution that by using these 3 equal house systems, it resolves all these planets, all these problems, and it works beautifully. I've been using equal houses and equal from the midheaven for decades. It's only very recently I've introduced equal from the vertex, as I ran into some problems that solved, and everything fits more beautifully and elegantly together. Okay, so this is what I'm proposing as a house system. It's the house systems that I've been using for a very, very long time. I've been using equal and equal from the midheaven for a long time, and recently started adding equal from the vertex. Okay. This just reviews what I just mentioned to you. And to summarize, the tropical zodiac, equal house system, equal from the midheaven house system, and equal from the vertex house system are all created by a great circle intersecting the ecliptic plane. And the tropical zodiac, it's the equatorial plane. Equal houses is the horizon plane. Equal from the midheaven, it's the meridian plane. And the vertex, it's from the prime vertical plane. So they're all created. Anyway, if you're not into the astronomy, don't worry about it. Just keep in mind that there's an elegant, beautiful underlying system that explains why this works. We have a simple and elegant theoretical basis. as I mentioned here in this top paragraph. And another thing about using these three house systems that's beautiful is it brings us into harmony, you could say, with modern science and modern metaphysics. So on this slide, I briefly summarize how houses are created. I have an entire video. You can search on YouTube for a new theoretical framework for astrology. And I have an entire video. I think it's well over a half hour long, if I remember correct, maybe close to an hour, that explains in detail the foundation of astrology and sacred geometry, how there's something called space and structures in space, and how spin creates these structures in space through number sequences. And it may all sound real wild and crazy if you're hearing it for the first time, but it's very beautifully explains how astrology works in a way that's more consistent with our understanding of how the world works. So we're building, you might say, a theory of everything, where everything fits together. We resolve things, that didn't make sense before, like how could the ascendant be conjunct the midheaven, and yet the person's perfectly normal, and it all fits together, building upon what we already know. I'm going to mention one last thing. One of the things I mention in this video, A New Theoretical Framework for Astrology, is that there's a jewel-like structure in space, and the jewel-like structure is complex. It's not impossible. It very well could be that quadrant house systems like Placidus, Regiomontanus, Campanus, etc. do work. Maybe there's this incredibly complex system and it creates all these kinds of facets of a jewel. But at least for now, I think it makes the most sense to just use these three house systems because they work beautifully and elegantly, and I think you're going to find that they make sense. The midheaven houses relate to your projecting yourself in the world, how you bring what's in your heart out into the world. The vertex has more to do with colleagues, people that you associate with in relationship to your worldly activities. And the equal houses, equal from the ascendant, the normal equal houses, is about your neighbors and your friends, your horizontal reality. So all three of these houses work slightly differently. Okay, so these concluding comments are, I've already gone over all this, but let me just read what's here. Number one, quadrant houses appear to work very well, and we can see how this might be an effect of the three variations of equal houses. That's one of my big points. There are these three variations of equal houses, equal from the ascendant, equal from the midheaven, equal from the vertex, that create an effect similar to quadrant houses. That's why they've always seemed to work. The three variations of equal houses resolve the problem of an undefined ascendant at high latitudes because we begin to rely more on the vertex and equal from the vertex as we get to high latitudes. The vertex becomes more powerful away from the equator, and the ascendant becomes more powerful closer to the equator. I'll have a link to a video that discusses that. I'll be having more videos that go into more detail on that. And as I said, the three variations of equal houses has a solid and simple theoretical basis. It may not seem so simple to you right now if all this terminology of great circles and everything else is new, but it is conceptually simple. And the three house systems, therefore, my last paragraph, are empirically and theoretically very compelling. I've been using equal from the ascendant and equal from the midheaven since the 1970s, and I've had these ideas since then. I just haven't told many people about it, but they've been developing and growing, and now I'm presenting all this information. And by the way, on whole sign houses, they might work. Whole sign houses are like a different animal. They may work. They may work beautifully because they are a relationship of signs to each other. Whole sign houses means if you have Taurus rising and a planet is in Cancer, then it's in the third sign, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, from the sign that's rising. It's a relative zodiac sign, how far apart the signs are. And that could very well work as well. It's a little bit different from houses that are, and the zodiac, which are created by spin and the intersection of these great circles. But it very, very well may work as well. So that's it, my friends. I've been getting a lot of questions about what house system do you use and why do you use it. So that's my answer to the question. I use those 3 house systems. I'm almost positive this is my last slide. Yes, it is. Well, thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.